Hello, and welcome to episode 122 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We're here today with Dr. Edward Montgomery, Dean of the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. Dr. Montgomery is also the former executive director of the White House Council for Auto Communities and Workers, the former dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences at the University of Maryland, and the former deputy secretary of labor in the Clinton administration. Dr. Montgomery, how are you doing today?
Fine. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you. The first question I'd like to pose to you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Well, right now, I'm as the dean of the McCourt School. We're trying to generate, to train the next generation of public policy leaders, to get people with tools to think about, to design, and the skills to implement effective public policy, both in the United States and around the globe. That's sort of the core mission of the McCourt School.
So why is it important to have the training for these future public servants here? What is particular about the training that is going to better prepare them to be public servants in the future?
I think whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whatever your political party is, you want government to serve the people in the most effective way it can. To do that, you need the kind of leaders and trained people in the government to implement policies, whether it be education, to make sure that our schools work, whether it be transportation, to have our roads be safe, whether it be health care for drugs and effective delivery of medicine. All those require skilled bureaucrats, for want of a better word, skilled government servants, skilled public servants, both in the government and, quite frankly, in the nonprofit sector and increasingly in the business sector, working together to implement effective policies.
So it seems like a big, an attractive selling feature of the McCourt School of Public Policy is that there's so many professors here at the McCourt School that have great accomplishments in the private and public sector, a lot of what you would say real-world experience. Can you speak a little bit about what that brings to the school, and then we can segue into the sort of experience that you bring to the school?
So one of the great attractions of being at the McCourt School in Washington, D.C. is that we have as our resource base faculty who are coming out of government, whether it just be in the recent administration or administrations past, people who have had experience both teaching and thinking and doing research on public policy, but actually implementing. We've got people who've been senior officials at OMB. We've had senior officials at Treasury, senior officials at the Labor Department, and many other agencies. All are here for our students to be able to draw on, not to mention we've had former presidents of Costa Rica. We've had other international leaders here. So the students get a blend. They get both the academic, the practical, the theoretical, the quantitative skills, and they also get the real-world implementation.
And now you also come from a lot of real-world implementation experience. Most recently, you were on the Council for Auto Communities and Workers, and also you've been in the Department of Labor in the 1990s, and you've had a lot of different positions. Can you speak a little bit first about what happened with the bailout and how you ended up getting on the Council for Auto Communities and Workers and what that path was like?
Well, the path there was a combination of probably two things. One, the General Motors and Chrysler, as we went into the Great Recession, were in deep trouble. The auto companies themselves, as well as the network of suppliers, accounted for millions of jobs across the Midwest and across the country. And so initially President Bush, and then right when President Obama came in, it fell to him, had to think about, do we intervene? Do we support these companies? Do we support the network of suppliers and the communities and the workers who rely upon them? And they both made an affirmative decision to do so. And one of the things they wanted to do is, if the government was going to help these companies, if the government was going to bail them out, to make sure that they were restructured in ways that, one, would give them a chance to last, but two, was an effective use of the taxpayers' money.
So why go to you?
So obviously, if you're going to do a restructuring of companies, you have to think about workers. And I had spent my career in doing labor economics, doing work looking at communities who are going through adjustments when plants open and close, thinking about what's the relationship between pensions and wages and compensation. And so a big piece of the restructuring was dealing with the UAWs, dealing with workers. And I had experience both in the Labor Department and as an academic on those pieces.
So it sounds like I've also read that your father was very involved in the labor union. Can you speak about what he was able to do, just to kind of get a background of where you're coming from, what his interest was, but more importantly, how that influences your work and how that influenced your decision to go into labor?
So when I was a kid, my dad was initially a machinist, and he...
Where was that?
Initially, when I was born in New York City, but I lived there all of 9 months, and then he moved us to Minnesota because there were a lot of progressive labor movement, workers in the Minnesota region in the Midwest. And he went to work at companies like Honeywell and a variety of other places. But he was also a union organizer. He was deeply sympathetic to unions and trying to get them into places and being supportive of it. And so he initially was he was a skilled tradesman. He was a machinist, but he was a union worker, and he experienced a number of layoffs. And eventually, my father got tired of being laid off. He said, "I've got 2 young kids to feed, me and my brother. Need some security." And so he went back and he got a PhD, and he did it in labor history. And so he became one of the first labor historians who studied labor history from the point of view of the workers, as opposed to the point of view of the companies. Or
previous labor historians had taken it from the point of view of the capitalists?
Often, how do we think about, if you think about the Taylorites and so forth, they think the notion of labor was about how do we organize workers, how do we make them most efficient.
Taylorite? Taylorite?
Frederick Taylor, yeah.
Who is he?
Frederick Taylor was the first person, or one of the first person who thought about putting in time and motion studies. Who, when automation was going in place, he was a study of efficiency.
A 20th century academic?
No, he wasn't an academic. He actually worked with companies and founded a school of thought around how to make companies efficient as automation was first taking over.
So your father gets a PhD in labor studies? Labor history. And he proceeds to be, does he go into academia?
So he goes into academia. We moved to Pittsburgh. We moved to Pittsburgh in the early 1960s when the steel industry is booming, and he does, we spend the better part of 20 years in Pittsburgh. I grew up in Pittsburgh with a little interlude going to England for a couple of years. And so my formative experiences is growing up in Pittsburgh, which is a big labor town. My dad was very active, even as a faculty member, having alliances with various unions. I remember walking picket lines for the support of 1199, the hospital workers, and various other causes. He was not just an academic, he was a man who lived his work.
So was it when you were on those picket lines with your father that it first occurred to you that you might follow in your father's footsteps?
Well, I think he instilled in both me and my brother an appreciation, a respect, a deep passion for the struggles that ordinary men and women go through and in the work. And so my brother went on and became a labor lawyer, and I decided to become an economist and study labor economics as sort of my specialty. Neither of us became historians. He was... No one wanted to compete with Dad. He was really good.
Did you go straight through school to become an economist, or did you ever gain actual experience in the labor force?
So when I graduated, well, I had a number of summer jobs, which summer jobs are always wonderful experience. I had a couple as a truck driver and a delivery guy.
Really?
The Veterans Administration Hospital. They're good for telling you what you might want to do and also what you don't want to do.
Right.
But I had a number of those jobs. And then when I graduated college, I went and worked for Eastman Kodak up in Rochester. This was in the mid-1970s when Eastman Kodak had 50,000 employees. It was a prime example of a non-unionized but very progressive company in terms of how it treated its workers, the things that it provided in terms of benefits and so forth, but it wasn't a union environment. So I worked for Kodak a while, and I liked the job, but they said if you really wanted to do economics and be on their economics teams, you had to go get a PhD. You couldn't do it with a BA. And so I went back to graduate school and got my PhD.
Interesting. So you ended up following more directly in your father's footsteps and getting the same PhD and then ending up in academia because you were in the workforce and you found that you needed that PhD in order to have a better understanding of the economic policy that could actually help a company be profitable. So you go back to get your PhD in economics, and then what happens? Because you've taken a very interesting, somewhat serpentine path. So what happens after your PhD?
Well, it turns out that my very first job as a new freshman minute PhD was back at Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
So I returned to Pittsburgh in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
In the early 1980s, all of a sudden, in the recession in the 80s, the steel industry begins to collapse.
Huh.
So the backbone of the town that I grew up in and loved, Pittsburgh, started to decline as one mill after another closed up and down the valleys.
Through outsourcing?
Partly it was international competition, partly a change in technology. The days of the big open hearth furnaces and mass production mills were being replaced by mini mills who were able to make specialty steel and so forth. So it was a big part was imports. Some was technological change. So even to make the product, they didn't. Now you
need as much labor.
You didn't need as many people, and then the market became much more segmented. So all those things came on, but it put Pittsburgh through this incredible transformation. And so one of the things that led me to want to think about and be part of the auto thing was living in Pittsburgh, seeing how it took the town and the city 20 years to turn around.
So you were really seeing the effects of international monetary policy on real human people's lives.
Yes. So you saw up close guys who I had gone to high school with and would tell me stories when I got out with my PhD and they had been working since they were 18 at the mills. They were making more money than I was.
How'd that make you feel?
Well, it was a different life. I was happy with my choices, but it was like I was kind of envious. But then very quickly, most of them lost their job. And so then they had to figure out, could they stay in Pittsburgh? And many of them didn't. Many of them left and tried to chase jobs in the Sun Belt and different regions of the city. And the city started shrinking. And then many of the people who were left behind had to move from good-paying union jobs with lots of summer vacation and very generous benefits down to second and third tier types of employment where they were lucky to have a job and had to downsize. And so you saw up close the human face of what economic theory says is dynamic, Schumpeterian, creative construction and creation. It really has real consequences for real people. It may be the right thing for our economy, it may be the right thing in the long term, but in the short term, it has a face, and it's not pretty.
So sometimes it seems as though individual faces can be lost in the story in statistics and in big data. You have a massive data institute here, and oftentimes you can say, well, that anecdotal story isn't statistically significant, and it's really not representative of the whole body. Here at the McCourt School of Public Policy, you're really trying to teach students. Are you trying to teach students about both the data, but also the human implications of their policy decisions?
I mean, I think one of the core things that attracted me to Georgetown is it is a very value-based institution. That it has at its core a belief in human dignity and a concern that everybody be able to reach its potential. And so when we think about training public policy leaders or creating the generation that is going to be running and implementing our government programs into the future, we want them to have both technical skills but also heart, soul, values that reflect where we are, what we want to be as human beings. And so a very big part of our education is both classroom experiences and then who we bring in from the outside, the visitors that we can expose them to, the dinners that they can be a part of, the events that we put on, which are part of putting a human face on what they've learned about in their statistics of classes, what they learned about in their economics classes, what they learned about in their public management classes, is that these decisions have value consequences, have a human face behind them. And so you want to think about and you want to analyze and you want to think rigorously about what the data says. But then you have to remember what your values are.
So it sounds like when students come to this school, they're not only coming to be better prepared and better credentialed to take a place in the economy, but also they're trying to take a place in society, and that there's more to life than just the actual position that they rise to, which can change as frequently as it has in your career, but really you're trying to impart values on them and create a individual who is better prepared to participate in tomorrow's society, not just in tomorrow's economy. Is that fair?
Yeah, this was central to Frank McCourt, who gave us the gift that made the McCourt School. Central what he wanted. Mm-hmm. He did want well-trained professionals who were going to use evidence rather than anecdote or rather than their own conjecture or bias to make policy. But he wanted them to have the values that are central to and a commitment to making human life better, to letting people live, to be in service of others. And so part of what we hope to instill in the school is both the what I'll call the how to do your job in a technical sense, but also the values that should go with it, or to bring out those parts of and that commitment in each input.
So when you're talking about trying to, advance the public interest, and you're trying to impart these values of public service upon these students, it seems as though you're drawing very much upon the experiences that you've had in seeing the implications of actual public policy decisions on the labor movement. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, particularly working in the Department of Labor, and how your experiences in Pittsburgh and in Minnesota earlier led to your decisions that you made and the way that you executed your responsibilities while being Deputy Secretary of Labor? So,
the role of Deputy Secretary is largely the chief operating officer of this incredibly important agency that is in charge with 2 or 3 core missions. Mm-hmm. One, it is the provider of support and retraining for workers who become unemployed, or who don't have jobs, to help people transition into employment, to allow them to have the skills to compete and to constantly change their occupation. And the second, it is the enforcer of our nation's labor laws. Mm-hmm. And that's what keeps you safe on the job so that you don't get exposed to chemicals, that you don't have industrial accidents, that you get paid what you're supposed to get paid, mm-hmm. that you get your pension, that it's there when you're retired, that those promises that were made to you when you work are being kept. And so a big part of the Labor Department is this law enforcement function. And then, of course, it is also the collector of data and information. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is all part of it. So it's in some sense a full-service kind of agency that thinks about all aspects of the labor market experience. It was a privilege to get to run them. I came more from the training side, and I learned a lot about enforcing our laws and the importance of that, and how central that is to everyday men and women. It's not just those people over there. It matters to all of us.
So I hear you, as we approach the end of this podcast, I'd like to ask you a final question. I hear you discussing the mission of doing good and having a positive positive change to impact positive change upon the world. I'd like to ask you to speak to our audience for a moment about the legacy of public service that you have created and that you hope to create throughout the remainder of your career. What is it that really has driven you? You've spoken about some of the stories about your childhood friends and seeing them lose their job. You've spoken about your dad losing his job, and it sounds like there's a common theme of trying to give people a fair shake. But in your own words, can you speak to our audience about what it is that has motivated you to advance the public interest in so many multifarious ways? And on the other hand, what do you hope will be your legacy throughout the course of your career?
I think the central part, which I would say comes from my dad. I think every day he had a commitment to try and make the world a little bit better. Mm-hmm. And the sphere that he chose to operate on was thinking about people's working conditions and the benefits that they could observe, they could reap from doing that. And he worked hard personally. He believed that people should work hard. But he also believed that people should be treated fairly when they work hard, and they should be helped when they can't get a job. And so that's sort of the core. That for me, trying to be part a small cog, a piece of what makes that better. Whether anybody knows I was part of it, knowing myself that I got up and made some difference in somebody's life somewhere is an incredibly satisfying thing. It's beautiful when you're a faculty member and you taught somebody and they come back 30 years later and say, your class opened my eyes and instilled in me a desire to do good things and to explore my own personal direction. Or it was critical as a public servant to actually be able to help people get jobs, get a fair shake on the workplace.
And that has been Dr. Edward Montgomery, Dean of the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University, the former Executive Director of the White House Council for Auto Communities and Workers, former Dean of the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences at University of Maryland, and a former Deputy Secretary of Labor in the Clinton administration, who speaks not about being motivated to advance the public interest by a desire to receive public recognition, but to be able to look in the mirror and see and to recognize in himself a man who has sought to make people's lives better, to give them a fair shake in life, to ensure that promises are kept to Americans to whom promises have been made. He has been in many different areas of the economy, working in the labor mills as a trucker. He's seen his dad work in labor mills. He's worked in a summer trucker. He's been in Kodak. He has been in the White House and in the cabinet department. And what Dr. Montgomery says is, throughout the variety of the different experiences that he has had in life, he has had a primary value that has carried him through, which is he has a mission of doing good, to affect the world in a positive way. And because of his many different experiences, he brings a multidisciplinary perspective to the McCourt School of Public Policy at Georgetown University. Dr. Montgomery, I'd like to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And this has been episode 122 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. I'd like to ask you to subscribe at publicinterestpodcast.com, visit us on iTunes or podcast app on Apple, and should you wish to communicate a message to Dr. Montgomery, feel free to leave a voicemail on the number listed on the Contact Us page of the Public Interest Podcast website. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.